Hello there, I'm the Dragon Eater, and I've been thinking of making this video in particular since March/end of February. The reason why I didn't make or upload it sooner was because April is Autism Acceptance Month. Some people might call it Autism Awareness Month, but I chose acceptance because while people might be aware that autistic people exist, they might not accept their differences. For the sake of this video, I will be including both in case you aren't aware first. This video will be in 3 parts moving forward: awareness, acceptance, and then conclusion. In awareness, we will be talking about terms, stats, myths, facts, those kinds of things. Then we have acceptance, my experience, which is something you won't see in other videos on autism. There's a reason why. Autism Spectrum Disorder, or ASD, or what I will call in this video, autism, affects 1% of the world population. It is a developmental disorder characterized by social and communication difficulties, repetitive behaviors, and differences in sensitivities. This is obviously bare bones, so let's break it down a little bit. The communication can range from not talking at all to talking only about things they are super interested in, known as special interests. Repetitive behaviors can be repeating words and sentences, also known as echolalia, rocking back and forth to stimulate, also known as stimming, or strict adherence to routine. Social difficulties can range from not being able to keep friends because they can't stop talking about their special interests, or because not everyone likes something the way the autistic individual does. Differences in sensitivities can be hypo or hypersensitive, and every sense and even source of sensitivity is different for every person. You might have noticed that I mentioned the term special interest. A special interest is different from a hobby. What makes them different from hobbies is how much time and how narrow one is interested in the topic, which is intense and very, very focused and very, very narrow. A non-autistic person might have a hobby in taking care of houseplants. If that plant-loving person was autistic, they might talk about types of cacti, what cacti, have a cacti theme room, cacti, cacti, cacti. Friends might wonder why the person loves cacti so much. That is an example of a special interest. Like I said before, this can impact communication and social skills a whole lot. Repetitive behavior and words kind of go hand in hand. Like I said, rocking back and forth is an example of stimming. Other examples are flapping, snapping, pacing, etc. If one is hyposensitive, they might stim to keep their senses back in balance. Sensitivities can vary from person to person. All 5 senses can be affected, but also one sense or somewhere in between. Stimming can help if one is feeling hyposensitive, but if one is hypersensitive, it can result in a meltdown. It is a response to excessive stimuli. Stimming is more prominent to keep the senses back in balance, but the stimming can be way more intense and more distressing for everyone. There might be crying, running away with the focus of getting away from the stimuli, and even more intense rocking back and forth. These are only a few examples of what can happen. It doesn't help to tell them to stop overreacting. They can't. It's not a temper tantrum when they don't have things go their way. Sometimes, though, they might not melt down. They might shut down. That is when they freeze on the spot without saying anything, hide away, and might not speak if they're a verbal person. It's like paralysis. It's not that they don't want to move, it's that they can't because they're overwhelmed. Imagine all of this in a place that doesn't accept you. It could be your neighbors, family, school, even people who are supposed to be your friends. It might be subconscious, or it could be intentional. However, they might try to lay low on their meltdowns, shutdowns, or try to branch out on topics that might not interest them. They might try to maintain eye contact, which is very hard. They might try to eat the food they don't like in public, which can also be very, very hard. However, they're not being their authentic selves. They are masking. Masking comes easier for some than others. For example, girls might mask more than boys, which might be why boys are more likely to be diagnosed at a younger age than girls. Masking, though, can be forced onto someone. It can be very, very hard. It can cause an autistic person to be mentally and physically exhausted. So what happens when they can't take it anymore? They burn out. All the things we talked about before masking intensifies. It can be like a meltdown, but longer. The brain of an autistic person needs to recharge in their own way. If they can't do that, it could be disastrous. So, what are the causes of autism? There could be a multitude of factors, but one pops up in regular conversation that is a huge myth. Andrew Wakefield and a dozen of his co-workers issued an article in the Lancelot, a prestigious scientific journal, that the MMR vaccine caused autism, as well as gastrointestinal problems. The data could not be repeated. The sample size was way too small, and there was data that contradicted the hypothesis. Wakefield is no longer a licensed medical professional, and it turns out the only thing the MMR vaccine did was what it was said to do: prevent measles, mumps, and rubella. What could cause the brain to be wired differently is outside of the parent's or child's control, like genetics, other disorders like Fragile X syndrome, and the parent's age. It isn't the parent's fault that the child has autism. However, it can be managed if it is something that severely inhibits day-to-day life. It tends to group up with other disorders like depression, anxiety, or ADHD. So treating those is a good way to start. Therefore, medications and cognitive behavioral therapy can help the autistic person, even if it's treating the conditions surrounding autism without aiming at it. Think of it like an arrow and a target. The medications and cognitive behavioral therapy is the bow, and the target is the autism. When it aims, it doesn't aim exactly for the bullseye, which is autism, but it's all of the other stuff. If the person wants to manage autism in particular, occupational, speech, and even physical therapy can greatly help. Those are the kinds of arrows that can land a bullseye. However, these are for coping, not necessarily trying to make them normal. Therefore, I wouldn't recommend things like applied behavioral analysis unless the licensed medical professionals are using applied behavioral analysis to help them cope with day-to-day life. Otherwise, I would not recommend it. It's very harmful for the child, even if it helps the people surrounding the child, like their loved ones. But if you don't want to go for therapies, there are other resources out there, especially on the internet, that can help with certain hypersensitivities. I first was exhibiting signs I was on the spectrum, another way of saying I have autism, when I was very, very little. My first sign was a fear of all things thunderstorms, and Mom has a picture of me crying at a young age because I thought the flashing light of the cameras back in the day meant thunder. There were a lot of other oddities as well, some still affecting me to this day. I didn't like finger painting or Play-Doh because I didn't like my hands smelling weird or paints in my skin. Mom would talk about how I hated eating anything that required me to hold the food, like sandwiches. Turns out I like to chicken sandwiches to this day. I would drum on the table in the restaurant whenever I waited for food, usually to a song I really enjoyed at the time. Either that slowed down, or maybe I lost the awareness that I was doing it. Either way, that was a stim I had. My stims even today seem to have a lot to do with my hands. There were a lot of special interests over the years, and some lasted years before falling into the back of my mind for whatever reason. For example, since March of 2020, I dove deep down into Animal Crossing as a franchise on and off. It was interesting to see the differences, but I think the update and the DLC made the wait worth it. I could tell you some of the most obscure facts about it though. I have experienced both meltdowns and shutdowns during thunderstorms. I also remember crying at Disneyland during the fireworks display because it was so loud to my ears. The only concerts I would want to go are symphony orchestra concerts, and those in musicals can be iffy, depending on the music, the show if it's a musical, or the location. I wouldn't want to go anywhere near a symphony orchestra with cannons that are part of percussion, for example. Looking at you, 1812 Overture. You got lucky because the orchestra was playing indoors at the time. Does this affect my day-to-day life? It can, especially due to my strict routine. I have to be productive in the mornings and afternoons, but after 3:30ish, all bets are off. I do what I want. But when that time between 7 a.m. and 3:30 is rudely interrupted of any sorts, then unless it's a deadline, I kinda just want to recharge. So you might want to pay it forward by donating to a charity that supports autistic people. Awesome! Thanks so much! However, it depends on the charity whether you're helping the people you intend to help or attempt to spread hatred. For example, the Autism Self-Advocacy Network actually has autistic people in their list of staff and advocates for autistic people. Autism Speaks was made for parents to pretty much fear the disorder, try to find a cure even though it's not a disease but a developmental disorder, and doesn't even consider autistic people themselves in any process of the ad campaigns or media they create. Autism Speaks does not speak for me. It also helps to just be understanding of people that are different. They're going through things that you might never see in your life. It helps to spread kindness and understanding. Stay safe, and I'll see you soon. Bye!